In the quaint Midwestern town where I, Elena Martinez, lived, life had a rhythm as predictable as the ticking of an old clock. But ever since my mother passed away, that rhythm had been disrupted by the uninvited intrusions of two people: my mother-in-law, Helen, and my sister-in-law, Rachel. They had a knack for appearing at my doorstep just when I craved solitude the most. "You know, Elena, it's quite rude to keep us waiting at the door," Helen would say, with a tone dripping with passive aggression. I could see Rachel smirking beside her, her eyes scanning my living room like a hawk. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting anyone," I'd reply, my voice strained with forced politeness. Their visits had become a dreaded routine. Each time they arrived, they expected to be entertained and catered to as if they were royalty, and I, a mere servant in my own house. "We're just here to keep you company, dear. You must be so lonely without your children," Helen would chide, settling herself comfortably on my couch. Rachel would follow suit, lounging as if she owned the place, and then would come the most irksome part. "Elena, why don't you order us some steaks? We can't have our visit without a proper meal," Rachel would suggest, her voice sweet yet commanding. "But it's almost 4 p.m., I would protest weakly. Helen would wave her hand dismissively. "Nonsense, dear. It's never too late for a good meal. And make sure it's from that expensive place downtown. We deserve a treat, don't we, Rachel?" As I begrudgingly placed the order, watching the numbers on the bill climb, I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. These steak dinners were bleeding me dry, yet I couldn't muster the courage to stand up to them. It was a financial strain I could ill afford, but Helen and Rachel seemed oblivious to my plight. What made it worse was my husband Michael's indifference. Whenever I tried to discuss the matter with him, his responses were dismissive at best. "They're family, Elena. It's just a few steaks. Don't make a big deal out of it," Michael would say, avoiding my gaze. "But it's every day, Michael. And it's not just about the money. They're taking advantage of our hospitality," I would argue, my frustration evident. "Elena, they mean well. You're overreacting," he would conclude, effectively shutting down any further discussion. This pattern continued for 2 long years. 2 years of unannounced visits, expensive meals, and a growing sense of resentment. It felt like I was trapped in a cycle with no escape. But little did I know the real storm was yet to come, a storm that would change everything. The routine continued, each day blending into the next with Helen and Rachel's unrelenting visits. However, one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my living room, Michael came home with a look on his face that spelled trouble. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually stern. Sensing the gravity in his tone, I braced myself. "What is it, Michael?" He took a deep breath and, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. "My parents and Rachel's family are moving in with us next week. You need to clear out your room." I felt the room spin around me. "What? Michael, this is our home? You can't just decide that without discussing it with me." Michael's expression was cold, unyielding. "It's decided, Elena. They need a place to stay, and it's high time we do our part for the family." "But where am I supposed to go?" My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and hurt swelling within me. "You figure it out. Maybe you can stay with a friend," he said dismissively. This was my family home, passed down to me from my parents. To be told I had no place in it was more than just an insult. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. I stood there, numb, as Michael continued. "You're always complaining about Helen and Rachel. This way you won't have to deal with them anymore." His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I realized then that the man standing before me was not the Michael I had married. He had become a stranger, one who valued his family over his wife. As Michael walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit room, a fire ignited within me. A fire of anger, yes, but more than that, a determination to stand up for myself. "I'll clear out the house," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "But not in the way you expect." Michael paused, turning back with a smirk. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight. But if you're being sensible for once, that's good." He didn't understand. He couldn't see the resolve that had taken hold in me. For years, I had been the dutiful wife, bending over backward to accommodate his and his family's whims. But not anymore. The next morning, as Michael left for his business trip, I took my first step towards freedom. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had found the night before. My voice was calm, my instructions clear. "Yes, I'd like to schedule a pickup for all my furniture and appliances," I said, a sense of empowerment growing with each word. "And I need it done before the end of this week." As I hung up the phone, a sense of exhilaration washed over me. It was the beginning of my revenge, a plan meticulously crafted to turn the tables on those who had wronged me. Michael thought he had won, but he was gravely mistaken. The house would be cleared out, yes, but it would be empty for him and his precious family. I was taking back control, one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I coordinated with movers, arranged for the sale of furniture, and secretly packed my personal belongings. Every item that held sentimental value to me was carefully boxed up, ready to be transported to my new temporary refuge, my son's apartment in the city. As the movers worked, the house began to echo with the emptiness of its soon-to-be barren rooms. Each piece of furniture that left the house felt like shedding a layer of the life I had built here, but with it, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The day before Michael's return, the house stood empty, a hollow shell of its former warmth. I took one last look around, memories flashing through my mind, of laughter, of tears, of moments cherished and now left behind. But this was no time for nostalgia. It was time for retribution. I left a note on the barren kitchen counter, its words succinct. "Michael, as per your request, I have cleared out the house. Good luck with your new living arrangements. Elena." With that, I turned my back on the life I had known and headed to the city, a mix of apprehension and excitement for what lay ahead. Upon arriving at my son's apartment, his welcome was warm but tinged with concern. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "I've never been more certain," I replied, my resolve unwavering. That evening, as anticipated, my phone rang. It was Michael, his voice a cocktail of confusion and rage. "Elena, what the hell have you done? The house is empty." "Yes, Michael, you said to clear out my room. I took it to mean the entire house," I responded coolly. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Where are you? What about all our stuff?" "I've taken what's mine. The rest is for you to figure out," I said, a sense of satisfaction creeping into my voice. "You can't do this to me, to us." Michael's voice cracked with desperation. "Funny, I thought the same when you decided to kick me out of my own house," I retorted. The line went silent for a moment before Michael hung up. I knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start to taking back my life and dignity. Sitting in the quiet of my son's apartment, I realized this was more than just revenge. It was a statement that I was no longer the Elena who would be walked over and disregarded. This was a new chapter, one where I would be the author of my own story. The next morning, the gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains of my son's apartment, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. My phone rang, the caller ID flashing Michael's name. I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught. "Elena, you've got to come back. This is madness." Michael's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm not coming back, Michael. You made it clear I wasn't wanted," I replied, my voice steady. "You can't just sell all our things and leave. What about us? What about our marriage?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Us? Our marriage?" I scoffed. "That ended when you chose your family over me in my own home." There was silence on the other end. I knew I had hit a nerve. It was then that I revealed the full extent of my actions. "Also, Michael, I've started the process of selling the house. As you so eloquently put it, it doesn't matter who it originally belonged to." "You can't do that, Elena. It's my home too." His voice was rising in panic now. "Not anymore, Michael. And since you're so concerned about family, I'm sure Helen and Rachel can help you find a new place." The line went dead. I knew this wasn't the end of it, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. Later that day, Rachel called, her voice dripping with venom. "You backstabbing witch, how could you do this to us? Where are we supposed to go?" "The same place you expected me to go," I replied coldly. "You and Helen were so eager to take over my home. I'm sure you can figure something out." "You'll pay for this, Elena. You think you're so clever, but you're nothing without us," Rachel hissed before hanging up. Their threats and pleas continued over the next few days, but I remained resolute. I had spent too many years being manipulated and undermined. It was time they faced the consequences of their actions. As I started my new job in the city, a sense of liberation enveloped me. I was no longer the doormat Elena, but a woman who stood up for herself. The drama and chaos of my past life felt like a distant memory as I embraced this new chapter. In the end, my revenge wasn't just about emptying a house or selling off property. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and dignity. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were left to deal with the mess they had created, while I finally moved forward, free from their toxic grasp. Weeks turned into months, and my life in the city started to take on a rhythm of its own. The calls from Michael, Helen, and Rachel became less frequent, their voices losing the battle against my newfound resolve. I had started to build a life for myself, one that was free from their manipulation and control. One afternoon, as I sat in my modest but cozy apartment, my lawyer called with news. "Elena, the court has finalized your divorce, and the house, it's legally yours." Michael's claim was denied. A wave of relief washed over me. This was more than just a legal victory. It was vindication. It was proof that I had been right to stand up for myself, to fight back against the injustice that had been thrust upon me. But how? That house is all I have. Michael's incredulous voice echoed through the phone later that day. "You made your choices, Michael. You chose your family over your wife. Now you live with those choices," I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the closure I felt inside. "But Elena, where will I go?" "I have nothing," he pleaded. "That's not my concern anymore, Michael. You should have thought of that before," I replied before hanging up. In the weeks that followed, rumors reached me through friends still living in my hometown. Michael, Helen, and Rachel had been forced to move into a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. Their once comfortable lives had become a daily struggle, a stark contrast to the luxury they had once taken for granted. I heard about Helen and Rachel's constant bickering, their relationship strained under the weight of their new reality. Michael, it seemed, had taken to gambling, hoping to win back some of their lost fortune, but only sinking deeper into despair. These stories, once a source of pain, now seemed distant, almost foreign. I had moved on, building a life that was mine and mine alone. My job in the city was fulfilling, and my evenings were spent exploring my newfound freedom. One day, as I walked through the bustling city streets, I bumped into Anthony, a friend from my hometown who had also moved to the city. We shared our stories, finding solace in our mutual experiences. "Elena, it's incredible how much you've changed. You're like a completely different person," Anthony said, admiration in his eyes. "I had to change, Anthony. It was the only way to save myself," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. As we talked, I realized that Anthony and I had more in common than our past. We both had been through trials that had shaped us, made us stronger. And in that strength, we found a connection. Life had taken me on a journey I never expected. I had faced my fears, stood up to those who had wronged me, and come out stronger on the other side. My story was one of transformation, of a woman who reclaimed her life from the ashes of her past. And as I looked ahead, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. With my head held high and my spirit unbroken, I stepped forward into my new life, a life where I was the author of my own destiny.